Hi all, thanks for tuning in the Global Azure Bootcamp 2022. This is the MTT edition, which means you are going to see a lot of content from different Microsoft technical trainers around the world. My name is Karel De Winter, I'm an Azure technical trainer working for Microsoft, and today I'm going to talk about Azure Arc-enabled servers. So let me begin with telling you a little story here. So you may know or you may not know that I have a background as a system engineer, which means I was responsible for mainly deploying servers, deploying hardware, but also switches, routers, storage, and so on. So the thing I remember is when I stepped into a data center, I saw all the blinking LEDs. I heard the noise of the fans, the cooling fans, and that was a very good feeling. And yeah, those days are gone because now everything is in the cloud and you don't have to step in a data center anymore. You don't have to plug in your cable where you need to have network connectivity and so on. But there are still a lot of customers that have own data centers and that are also running their own hardware and maintaining those servers and hardware. And this is what we are going to talk about today, right? You need to manage those data center. You need to still be able to have the same capabilities as you do right now in the cloud and provide those capabilities now in your own data center on premises. So let me just introduce me again. My name is Karel De Winter. You can reach out to me if you go to aka.ms/whoiskarel. You will see my blog and there you can find my LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub account and so on. So if you want to connect with me, feel free and send me an invite. So what we see mainly today is that customer environment are still complex, right? They are having different kinds of applications. They have containerized applications or still old .NET applications that they still use for financing or for whatever reason. They still need to have that old application and it only runs on premises. So those are very complex environments, but also complex applications. We also see a lot of customers have diverse infrastructure. They have maybe different kinds of vendors combined in their data center. They even have a multi-cloud strategy, which means that they are not only having their infrastructure in Microsoft Azure Cloud, but also in other third-party vendors. And that means it's very complex, right? The multi-cloud environment, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to maintain the same rules that apply into your own on-premises data center, also in your cloud environments? And that's where Azure Arc will come in, right? So we have different kinds of applications today. We have VMs, we have different kinds of databases, we have containerized applications. We go with serverless. If we have serverless applications that we host in the cloud or even on premises nowadays, that's also possible. How are we going to maintain that? So different data centers, different hosters, different OEM hardware, very complex environments. And those environments keep evolving, right? We are still looking into containerized applications. How can we modernize our application? How can we make sure that we split up our application, that we have microservices so we can manage the little things in one big application. We can update the front end without moving parts in the back end. We can have the middle tier that is responsible for a high load, and we can scale the front end if, for example, there are holidays coming up and you have a web shop, you can only scale the front end, right? So those are microservices. And that's what we also see, that a lot of customers that have applications are evolving to that kind of application structure. But still on-premise, right? You can still have on-premises applications, or parts of your application can be in a cloud environment, parts of your application can be on-premises. So what we also see is the customer pains, right? What are they trying to build? What are they trying to do? So they want to have a dashboard that rules all the applications, but also all the infrastructure. And betting on Azure being the platform also for their security. So they use Azure because there they have all the security flavors, but they want to have those flavors also in the on-premises data center. So how are they going to do that? Right now they have two different security applications. They have their own third-party vendors that are having security appliances, but also have endpoint protection, for example, doing encryption and so on. And in the cloud, they use the Microsoft flavors. They use the different Defender products that are available right there. So again, two different worlds. We need to bring those worlds together, right? And we need to make sure that they have one dashboard, that they have one single view, one single pane of glass that they can look at and see the complete application landscape. If you have a look at the applications, they can be anywhere, right? They can be even in a multi-cloud environment, they can be on-premises and so on. So they need to have one view to rule all the applications and all the application components. So they also have in-house extensions, for example, for non-Azure service. They build own extensions. How are they going to manage that? And how are they going to have a unified experience across all their virtual machines, not only on premises, but also in Azure. So a VM is a VM, right? But if it's hosted in Azure, it's going to be managed in a different way than you manage your VMs in an on-premises data center. Maybe you use System Center for that in an on-premises data center, and you use the automation capabilities that we have in Azure. So all those different things are very important nowadays that we see with customers that are having pains, that are having difficulties to manage all those different environments. And last but not least is how they are going to apply, for example, the ISO certification that they need to have for an on-premises data center for the complete company. How are they going to apply that in an Azure data center? Very difficult to maintain if you have different environments, if you even have an environment that you are not responsible for. So if you take Azure services, that means that Microsoft is responsible for the hardware, for the underlying layer, but you are still responsible for your application and for the SLAs that come with your application that you may or may not have to deal with your customers. So again, Azure Arc will be your solution to that, or to those pains, to those problems. It will give you one single view across all your applications, across all your resources that you have on premises, multi-cloud, and in Azure. And it will also maintain you by applying policy. So we can use Azure policies to have that one structure to rule your on-premises data center, but also your Azure cloud environment. So what we see is there is still momentum to hybrid, right? Hybrid is not going away. Hybrid will stay even forever, don't know. But hybrid will be a multi-cloud strategy also. We see that more than 90% of enterprises depend on hybrid, which means they still have on-premises data centers in some kind of way that host some kind of application. It can be very little, but they still have it and they still need to maintain it. And 93% of those enterprises are already having a multi-cloud strategy. Also very important that you can have multi-cloud vendors that are responsible for providing different kinds of applications. If you have a very large application landscape, that's also good to be aware of. So Azure Arc, that will be your bridge between your on-premises data center and Microsoft Azure. So it will give you the possibility to just make sure that the gap is not that big anymore between your on-premises data center and Microsoft Azure. So if you talk about Arc and if you talk about Azure Arc-enabled infrastructure, we have different flavors. I'm not going to explain everything in detail in this session, but first of all, I want to explain to you what Azure Arc-enabled service is. So for that, you can organize, but also do inventory, do monitoring, and have a complete governance, but also security plan that is simplified across your on-premises data center or even multi-cloud environments. We support of course, the Windows OSs, but also the Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu, and even the AWS Linux versions within the other multi-cloud vendors, right? The other flavor, so first of all, you have your Azure Arc-enabled servers. The other one is that you can have your SQL servers onboarded into the Azure environment. And by that, you can do the same things, right? You can do, you can apply tags to your VMs, but also do inventory of your SQL servers, do database analysis on your SQL servers in the Azure platform itself. So having existing SQL servers on Windows or even Linux servers, you can also onboard them into Azure Arc. And the last thing is that we have Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes. So that means that you can have any CNCF certified Kubernetes cluster that can be onboarded into Azure. So all the well-known Kubernetes vendors will work with Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes, and in that way you can also monitor, govern your Kubernetes cluster, but very important, you can deploy your application to whatever Kubernetes cluster you want, right? You can have your Kubernetes cluster on-prem, you can have an AKS cluster into the Azure environment, and you can, or you want to deploy that application to all the different environments, even if it's in an on-premises data center or in a multi-cloud environment. Just push that application to your Kubernetes cluster that will distribute the load and will also install and configure, do the configuration for you. So you have that GitOps approach, right? You have that GitOps approach that can leverage all the benefits of having infrastructure as code, but also maintaining the configuration of your application. And with that configuration, you can push that to whatever Kubernetes cluster you want, as long as it's CNCF certified. So we talked about Azure Arc, that it will extend your environment to Azure, right? But what does Azure Arc deliver? So it's Arc-enabled infrastructure will connect your on-premises resources, so your hybrid resources, but also your cloud-native resources. And it will also deploy and run your Azure services outside of Azure. So you can bring different flavors of Azure services into your own data center, like for example functions you can have, or Logic App. You can host those inside your data center and have the same experience as you have in the Azure environment within your own data center. So it will implement consistent inventory. It will have your consistent management. You have one thing that you can do for the management across all your environments, and you have one governance plan, one security plan that will rule them all. So you have to configure Azure VM extensions to use those Azure Management services, but I will explain that later on into a demo. And you also can manage and govern your Kubernetes clusters at scale, right? You can have also the Azure Data Services, which is another flavor of Azure Arc, which means that you can host your SQL managed instance that we know inside of the Azure environment into your on-premises environment, which means you can have the evergreen, so always up to date SQL environment into your own data centers, which is very nice. So you have the same monitoring, you have the same Azure policies that you can use across all your environments. So Arc-enabled servers, what it will provide you, like I said, it will onboard different kinds of OSs, not only Windows Server, but also the Linux variants. And it will give you additional management services, right? It will give you Azure Policy, you can have Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Monitor, you can go with the automation accounts that will rule your on-premises VMs in the same way as they do management on your Azure VM, so that's very nice. You can have Defender for Cloud that not only protects your Azure resources but also your on-prem resources. Very nice there that you have one security flavor that you can use. You can go with Auto Manage if you want to have backup but also monitoring enabled in one kind of smooth way. It will onboard those VMs, not only Azure VMs but also Arc VMs, into Auto Manage. And if you are a Microsoft partner and you manage different customers, or you are a very large enterprise customer that have different kinds of businesses within your enterprise structure, you can have, or you can use Azure Lighthouse to manage all those different customers or all those different environments within one single pane of glass. So you have one account that can manage different customers with Azure Lighthouse. If you want to connect an on-premises VM, right? If you talk about Azure Arc-enabled servers, what do we need to do? So first of all, we need to register certain kind of Azure resource providers, which will give you the opportunity to have those Arc-enabled servers and those services, resources created in your Azure environment. So you need to have the Microsoft Hybrid Compute and also the Microsoft Guest configuration enabled and registered in your on your subscription. And then the second thing is, if you want to onboard the VM, then you need to have or you need to generate a script, a certain PowerShell script that you can copy from the Azure Portal and then run on your on-premises VM, which in fact will install an Azure Connected Machine agent, and that will then make the connection between your on-premises VM and the Azure environment. Once you've run that script, you need to authenticate yourself against the Azure Portal, which means you are going to point out a subscription where the on-premises VM needs to be registered to. And in that way, once that task is finished, the VM will be onboarded. So you have the onboarding script. It's a PowerShell script, and if you want to have the Linux VM onboarded, it will be Linux, so it will be bash script that will run on your Linux VM. And in that way, you can have the Azure Connected Machine agent, which is a specific agent that is responsible for the Azure Arc connection between your on-prem VM and the Azure Portal, and that you can verify the connection, you can show the logs, you can test the connection, you can remove it via the AZCM agent, so the Azure Connected Machine agent. That's very important. That's the agent that is responsible for the communication between your on-prem VM and your Azure environment. And then, of course, you need to enable the management services like monitoring, backup, apply tags to your resources, do automation like update management, inventory, change tracking, all those good things that you already know in your or use in your or should use in your Azure environment. You can do the same with your on-premises VMs. New thing is that you can use Private Link. So you can use Private Link to securely connect to your Azure Arc, which means you have a private connection between your on-premises network and your Azure environment. So it's not going to have the connection via public internet. It's going to have the connection or build the connection via VPN or express route or whatever connection that you have built between your on-prem environment and the Azure network, which is a VNet within your Azure environment. And in that way, backup, but also the automation operations will go via the private link to your on-premises network. But now let me just quickly show you in the Azure Portal how it looks if we onboard a VM, and if we have a look at the Azure Portal, what the possibilities are with Azure Arc-enabled servers. All right, let's have a look in the Azure Portal, shall we? So first of all, if you go to the search bar above and you type in Azure Arc, you will see that there are different services available for you to enable Azure Arc. The main entry point for going to your Azure Arc resources is of course going to the Azure Arc service, and there you will see the Getting Started page, which will provide you with a lot of good content to the Microsoft Docs side, where you can have all the learnings that you need for onboarding your resources to Azure, but also they are talking about ArcBox, which I will explain just in a second. So on the left side, you will see your management capabilities, and you will also see the overview of your infrastructure, services that you can have, and also the data services. So I explained very little about the data services, but you can onboard your PostgreSQL hyperscale databases and also your SQL managed instances. So that means that you can have SQL managed instance on your in your on-premises data center, and there you can do the same things as you will with your SQL managed instance in an Azure environment. The other application services that we can onboard into Azure Arc or can host in an on-premises data center are the API management, which is in preview, app services, which are in preview, event grid topics, which are in preview, functions, which are in preview, and logic apps, which are also still in preview. So be aware that preview features cannot be used in production. They can, but you don't have an SLA, so don't do it. That's the best option that you will have. So if we look at Azure Arc-enabled servers, then we go to infrastructure, and we will see that I already have onboarded different kinds of servers. I have onboarded different flavors of Linux servers. I have onboarded 2 Windows OSs, which are Server 2019 and Server 2022, that are of course all capable of going with the Azure Arc agent and doing the onboarding for Azure Arc, so you can have all the good things if you use Azure Arc. If we, for example, have a look at our Windows 2022 server, what you will see is that it's onboarded into the Azure Portal, which means that you will see the computer name of your VM, that it has a specific location also. The location will be where the metadata is stored, and also which OS it is running, and also which version of the OS it is running. You can have different capabilities enabled for your Azure Arc VM, which is update management. You can enable update management, so it will look what updates are installed and what updates are needed on the VM. You can enable monitoring, which means it's going to send the logs to a log analytics workspace. You can have insights, which will give you the different correlation and relation between applications that are installed on the VM. For example, if your VM is hosting a web application, you will see that it has open ports to the internet on 443 or port 80, if you will. You can have Azure policies configured to apply on your VMs, so assign policies to your on-premises VMs. You can have change tracking and inventory, and also you can have Defender enabled on your VMs there. First things, if we go to the security tab, you will see it recommends you with different kinds of security modalities, and it will show you also the severity of the security issues that have been found on your VM itself. So you need to do an assessment before you can have the complete security alerts enabled and see the complete list of recommendations here. But that's for the security. So you can onboard them into Defender, and you can also enable or install the Defender Exploit Guard, which can give you a lot more security features and enhancements for your VM. Very important are the extensions. If you go to the extensions, you will see that the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, an MMA agent that we call it, is very important. That will have the capabilities of sending the logs to the log analytics workspace, and then with Azure Monitor you can have one monitoring view for your Azure resources, but also on-premises resources. Dependency agent, that's going to be the agent that is responsible for viewing the insights of your VM, so giving the correlation between the app that is installed on your VM and seeing which ports are open, and so on. And then you also see here that it's currently unavailable. I see now, but when an update is needed for that kind of agent, it will show you in the portal, and then you can click on upgrade, and it will trigger an update to do the agent upgrade on your VM itself. We can also see the properties of the VM, which will give you the specific OS version and the computer name, which is the DNS name inside of your VM, and so on. The very nice, very good things that you see here. If you go to operations in the left side, you will see that you can apply different policies, or you can assign different policies. Azure Policy is a mechanism that has built-in policies, but also you can build your policies on your own. That's called custom policies. If you have custom policies, then it will provide you with the same assignment that you can do with those built-in policies. Here I have only 3 assignments that are assigned to the specific resource group that my Azure Arc VM is sitting in. And that one is giving me the possibility to deploy the dependency agent, but also the log analytics agent to my specific VM in my on-prem data center. Then it will also tag the resources that are inside of those VMs. That's why we see, if I go to tags, it will have a specific tag. That's the project Jumpstart RBox, which is in fact my on-premises data center, but that tag is inherited by to the resources from the resource group, right? Then if we go to update management, very good thing that we can do is we can push updates from within the Azure environment to our on-premises environment and our Azure Arc-enabled VMs. So here we see that we are missing a lot of updates. I need to do updates for sure, the security updates, right? Always install the security updates. So you can trigger via scheduled update deployment. You can schedule the installation of the updates on your Azure Arc-enabled VMs. But here we see a nice view of the updates that are needed for our on-premises VM. In the same way as you do update management, you can also use inventory and change tracking. So with inventory, you will see the list of software that is installed, but also you have a look at the Windows services that are enabled and the registry, if you will. So here we see a list of software that's installed. So the Azure Connected Machine agent, right? That's the one that is needed to communicate or to do the communication from your Azure VM with your Azure environment, for your Azure Arc-enabled VM, to the Azure environment. And then we have the dependency agent, Edge is installed, and so on. If we go to change tracking, there you will see what has happened, what has changed on a software level, of course, to your VM. So you will see that Windows services have been stopped, started. You will see software, Windows Update, for example, that is installing software, extra updates that will be triggered and logged into the change tracking mechanism of your automation account. So it's your automation account that's of course needed to do the complete update management, inventory, change tracking. So that's a prerequisite, right? You need to have an automation account before you can use update management, inventory, and change tracking. If we then have a look at Insight, so that's the monitoring that we can see. So it's still the on-prem VM, right? But now we can see with Insights a complete map of that VM. So you will see that it has port 80 open and already 5 servers are connected. So it will be the download mechanism. So Windows updates, of course, that is triggering what updates do I need to install. So that's listening on that port. And we have also different other different kind of ports. But here you see a nice map of how many clients are connected to my Windows server and what it is doing exactly, right? We can also go to logs where we can run custom queries for our VM to see different kinds of logs there. We can have the resource health, which will give you the resource which will give you the health of your resources itself, and there you can trigger alerts, trigger alerts based on things that are happening. I have one health event here. The monitoring system received resource unavailable. So that means that, for example, the updates could not be checked, or that the status of the VM could not be checked. You will see that in the resource health, right? But let me first show you the on-premises data center that I have replicated in my Azure environment. So I'm using the Jumpstart RBox for that. If you don't know anything about the Jumpstart project, just go to this URL. You will find a lot of information all about Azure Arc, not only the Arc-enabled servers, but also the data services, And you will have a lot of good content there, even ARM templates, Terraform. You can have the scripts there that you need for your onboarding of your Azure VMs, of the onboarding of your on-premises VMs, and there you can find a lot of information. And it's also providing some kind of proof of concept setup. So that's what I'm using here, right? And it's called the Arc box. So the Arc box will provide you with all the VMs that you need. It will give you the VM in Azure that hosts a Hyper-V environment, which will have different VMs inside of it. So here you will see that I have my 2 Windows VMs, so my 2019 and 22 VM, my 2 different Linux servers, and also my SQL server, which I will talk about just in a second. So this is the Arc box. I have a Hyper-V environment, which is in fact my on-premises data center, but I don't have hardware anymore, or I don't have a basement or an attic propped full of hardware where I can host my own VMs on. So I do it in Azure. I just create a VM, and there I enable Hyper-V, I create VMs in there, and then I follow the procedure of onboarding. So I already explained it. You need to go to the portal. There you will find the script that you need to run inside of your on-premises VM. The script will run, it will authenticate you against the Azure Portal. It will install the Azure Connected Machine agent, and that agent is responsible for having the communication between your VM and your Azure environment. So if you go to the programs and features inside my Windows 2022 VM, you will see that the Azure Connected Machine agent is installed, but also the monitoring agent, so the MMA agent, and the dependency agent. And then if we go to, let me clear the screen here. If you go to the, if we want to see the status of the connection between our VM and the Azure environment, you can use the azcm agent command, which is the Connected Machine agent. That has a command line interface where you can have a lot of things like if you put the parameter show, or if you do check, or if you do logs, you will see a lot of different information. But here, let me just run the show command, which will give you the information when it has last connected, if the connection is okay, and if it's running fine or not. So very good to know that you need to run a specific command to show you all the detailed information about that. So that's my on-prem environment, and as you've seen, I also have a SQL server, so just a Windows VM with SQL Server in it, and that one we also can onboard into Azure. So let me quickly show you how you can manage your SQL servers then. In the left side, you will see under infrastructure that you also have beneath the servers the SQL servers. If you click on that, you will see all these SQL servers that are hosted on-prem that are onboarded into Azure Arc. So I've onboarded one. If you click on that, you will see the details. You will see which SQL server version it is, which edition it is hosting. In my case, it's the developer one. How many cores, what is the license type, and so on. So for that, again, you can enable Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which will give you the capabilities of monitoring the potential security risks and also the vulnerabilities, and you also get recommendations from that. Good to know is that you can run the environment health, so it will check your on-premise SQL. You can do SQL assessments also. It will execute the MMA extension also, which is needed to do the assessment and also to do the SQL assessment of your complete SQL server. So it will grab the logs from that, it will put that in a log analytics workspace, and then you can view the SQL assessment results, but just keep in mind that it can take a while before you have the report inside of your Azure environment. So this is it for the part of the demo. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to tune in into this URL and see a lot of other content from the Microsoft technical trainers around the world. Thanks again. See you soon. Bye.